Human arms don't bend. What is your arm doing? It's flipping. The forearm is flipping. That's not turning, it's flipping. Your arm is broken.
There is a victory inside us all. We can overcome anything. We'll fight together, side by side, lose but never in the battle for our lives.
I'm afraid I don't see a chance of winning here.
We'll win, even if it kills us.
Battle for our lives, hand in hand, I know we'll conquer. We will destroy this nemesis. Take up arms, we'll fight. No, never surrender. Nothing will stand in our way.
God Eater 3 is the anticipated sequel to God Eater 2, one of the only and biggest competitors Monster Hunter currently has, and unfortunately it's also the worst God Eater ever made. Let's start with the most important part of any monster hunting title, its base gameplay. And let's start with the one good thing I can say about this game's gameplay. In its rawest form, it feels like a copy and paste of how the other God Eaters felt, or like an attempt, anyway. There's a striking similarity here to its previous titles, however, that's quickly weighed down by a bunch of things. For one, Predator style is gone. No more picking what Devour you'd like to use, or customizing your burst effects. Blood arts are also gone. In fact, they seem to be completely retconned, but I'll talk about that later. Upgrading your impulse edge is a thing of the past, and instead you're now stuck with whatever the hell impulse edge they decided your weapon should get at its lowest level of power. No upgrades, no customization, nothing. Some aspect of blood art effects remain on base weapon combat in this new quote-unquote new thing called burst arts, but it's only a half port of the features God Eater 2 offered. Link support devices are now completely thrown out the window and seemingly replaced with a quote-unquote new feature called Engage, which is a low customization alternative that relies on you playing a specific broken game mode to unlock more of them past the base 3 the game gives you, halfway into the game, I might add. The game mode I'm referring to, by the way, is called Assault Missions, but I'll talk more about those later. God Eater 3 has zero truly new gameplay features, only cosmetic changes to previous features or just straight up removal of features altogether. The core gameplay is a bit modified, but it's in no way better. As an example, origami speeds are now doubled, as well as their attack animations. The base Hannibal moves as fast as its fastest form from God Eater 2 by default in this game. And it even still further upgrades to later variants like the Caligula that move faster than any origami ever has ever in any of the games now. Oh, this. I see. This one has some, yeah, I remember. This was no fun. They used this origami for like 10 fights in a row last game. I remember.
And one was extremely fast.
Yeah, one was on drugs, and this one's on drugs right now, honestly. Because all the origami in this game are sped up, so this one is already moving as fast as that one. Look at, yeah, this one's moving like the one that was on crack moved. That's some horse shit. Do you think there's a faster version? It seriously feels like origami are just on crack in this game. They all do more damage now by insane amounts. By the later story ranks, origami can one-shot you even if you have armor appropriate for that rank. If you're hoping this maybe introduces some more challenge, because maybe you thought the other games were too easy for whatever reason, the answer is no. Quite honestly, this is the easiest God Eater game ever made. Despite how unbalanced it clearly is, killing origami that can one-hit you has never been easier. They all have very exploitable mechanics, and this is the first God Eater game where you can reliably outrun every god in the game. They added a new shield charge mechanic where you can soar across the sky holding your shield out, blocking anything that comes your way and moving faster than the fastest origami in all 3 games. Add in the fact that they've added free healing fountains to the game that also restore your OP, and you can reliably kill the toughest bosses exclusively with ranged sniper attacks if you just bounce around the map between these healing fountains, because they're on a timer, and you can do that if you learn their timing. Did this fucker just heal? Dema! The origami heal! Those things will heal the origami! And since the enemies by rank 5 can all kinda 2-hit you, you don't have much of a choice except for to follow this strategy unless you want to waste all your healing items. If you're a keyboard and mouse user, good luck. This game dev team has apparently never heard of a mouse in their lives. The mouse in this game simulates an analog stick with 5 speed settings. However, unlike a proper analog stick, the mouse only gets 1 speed. So if you move your mouse across your entire mouse pad in 1 second or move it just an inch, your camera will move the same exact amount based on the speed that you selected. Slow or fast mouse movements do not affect camera speed. So if your speed is set too high, then any tiny little movement will cause your screen to jerk around like it's having a fucking seizure. Set it too low and it will take you 4 to 5 seconds just to look behind you or longer. Meaning if an origami jumps past you, you're kinda fucked. Well, camera control is gonna suck here. This works similarly to Monster Hunter. It's not actually you moving the camera. It's like translating what you're doing into an analog stick. So the fastest way to move your camera is to barely move your mouse in that direction. If you move it too fast, it doesn't go faster in the slightest. You're just moving your mouse fast for no reason. So that's highly annoying. I tried to find some ways to remedy this with the lock-on system. I thought I found a good fix, and then I realized something. They built in a target change system when you're locked on to make it easier to switch targets in battle. However, they linked it to the controller's right analog stick. Your mouse is simulating the right analog stick. However, your mouse only has 1 speed movement. Add all this together and you get this clearly not play-tested system where you accidentally move your mouse like 1/10 of a millimeter while attacking, and your camera lock is going to change rapidly as if you just held the analog stick to that side. This causes your camera to pretty much blink out of control and flip around and just generally get you killed or cause you extreme nausea. It's fucking changing my locked on target like crazy. I don't know why. Why does it keep doing this? Oh my god! What the fuck? Holy shit. Okay, I guess locking on when there's enemies nearby? Not something you're allowed to do. You can switch to a controller to bypass this problem, but from the experience of the friend I played with, non-PS4 controllers are likely to encounter some desyncing issues, as they probably only optimize the PS4 controls, since this game only came out on PC and PS4, and these devs clearly don't have any common sense in them at all. The game also suffered from a bunch of other strange casualizations, I guess we'll call them. For example, friendly fire. It's now turned off, thus making the character canon essentially null and void, because that was her whole shtick. She would friendly fire people. And she even recurred in both games prior to this. She's not in this one though. When origami step on you now, they no longer harm you. This makes tactical positioning pretty irrelevant and takes an entire portion of strategy out, as you just kind of slide around rather than suffer any real consequences from something the size of a building stepping on you.
Can I step on you?
Sure.
That's lewd.
And you don't mind it?
I don't.
So you,
I don't see that as lewd.
So you're that type of people.
What?
This also means that turtling is now an extremely viable tactic. You just gather aggro and then put up your shield and sit there. Better yet, sit in a healing fountain and AFK if you want. Your AI will tear the origami to shreds. You won't lose aggro because there is blatant player one preference in this game. Custom bullets are now more limited than in the other games. Traps serve little to no purpose. Stun grenades don't even stun anymore. They stagger. Explain that to me. Link bullets no longer have customizable effects. And the amount of link bullets you can stack are limited to 3 unless you implant a skill into one of your pieces of equipment specifically to allow you to bring more, thus nerfing you in some other way that you could have used that slot. Regardless, Link Burst in this game is more useless than in the other two games. It's actually really useless because the only thing it does now is enhance your base DPS. It doesn't enhance your speed or anything else it used to do, and that's ironic because in this game, the big, bad, scary origami that everyone's worried about is a type of origami that learned how to devour. If it devours you, which it will enter a burst phase like yours. However, theirs has so much kick that it feels like the developers just wanted to insult the players. Link Burst 3 will do less than double your damage, but an origami in Burst turns a 3-hit kill into a 1-hit kill. What's it doing? Oh my god! What the fuck?
You've really pissed me off.
It one-shotted me through a rock! What? Holy shit! That was through a rock! Okay. Ugh. Oh, Dema! Stop killing my friends! You piece of shit! Ah.
Oh, it's activating. It's gonna burst devour. Yeah, it's devouring. You stay over there! Over there! What did I just say? You piece of shit! I told you to stay! Ah! Stay! Ah! Jesus Christ! That's like 70% of my health. I wish I could do 70% of its health.
Being devoured by an origami also locks you off from the engage feature, further casualizing the game by finding a way to remove yet another gameplay feature, helping to make Ages, adaptive God Eaters, the most useless sounding God Eaters since Gen 1 God Eaters. In fact, they are useless, but we'll touch upon that once we get to the story. Origami in this game also despawn quicker than ever before. I don't understand why this is. They don't explain it, but as a result now, getting a Devour in mid-combat for materials is kind of a bitch. The tutorial here is really, really bare bones, and it doesn't teach you much of any of the mechanics. The game just sort of assumes you know how to play from the previous 2 games, and other than teaching you how to move, do a basic attack, change to your gun, it doesn't really teach you much of anything. Changing controls in your options is also kind of neutered, as certain gameplay critical options aren't even in the control section, and others that are there are hidden because they're linked to other controls. And the game doesn't tell you this anywhere, and when you change those controls, these linked controls will display their old command instead of the new one. I don't know if that's a glitch or bad UI design, but it's so confusing when you're starting the game. Crafting in this game has pretty much been gutted. Ticket trading no longer exists. Tickets no longer exist. Crafting items up and down is kind of gone. Unlocking recipes now is based on RNG instead of the now that you found it, we should be able to reproduce it for you kind of thing it used to be. Recipes for God Arcs are also based on RNG and missions instead of just unlocked the moment you hit the next rank. Progression is limited to rank still, but they at least kept the +1 God Arc upgrade system. However, in this game, +1 God Arcs are never explained to you, and they even changed the icon indicating +1, so it took me quite a while to figure out that they were even in the game. They're a lot rarer to find, and with how unbalanced the origami are, if you're looking for an easy run-through of the game, you're going to need to grind a lot of optional missions, get a fuck ton of +1 God Arcs, stick with the same God Arcs, don't switch based on elements anymore, and then just, put all your eggs into one basket, because otherwise you're not going to do enough damage. You're going to get 2-hit like crazy, but even then, the most you'll be able to really buff things up to is, oh, I'm not getting 2-hit anymore, I'm getting 3-hit. And this is pretty essential if you're not employing the whole healing fountain strategy I was talking about earlier. There's less missions than ever before in God Eater 3, and less variety of missions too. Every non-base mode has been removed. Hard missions, survival, extra, special, all those types of missions from God Eater 2 and 1, they're gone. All you get now are base missions and assault missions. And I think now is a good time to talk about assault missions. Assault missions are an 8-player multiplayer exclusive mode where the objective is to kill an adaptive origami, which by the way never gets explained anywhere, in 5 minutes or less. However, this game mode cannot be accessed in multiplayer.
You've unlocked assault missions, the elimination of adaptive origami, discovered in regions of particularly high ash density. Join with elite God Eaters from around the globe to defeat these fearsome foes. Is this that timed 6-player thing? The new assault missions available. Let's take a look at it. You cannot accept assault missions during multiplayer. Wait, I'm sorry, what? Correct me if I'm wrong. This just said team up with other God Eaters. It just said that, right? It just said that this was a multiplayer thing. It just said that. And now it says you cannot accept assault missions during multiplayer? What? Are you telling me that to do an assault mission with my friends, I have to first end the instance that I made for multiplayer? I have to end this lobby, which has to be made and is not done with drop-in, drop-out multiplayer. I have to end it, pick the mission, and then probably create this new, one-time lobby?
Say that out loud with me. Assault missions are a multiplayer exclusive game mode that cannot be accessed in multiplayer. I don't think that anyone at their dev team ever said that out loud, because I think it's pretty common sense that that's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. To access assault missions, you must go to single player and then select the mission. Once you do that, you'll be randomly thrown without warning into an 8-player multiplayer lobby that is completely disconnected from the actual multiplayer lobbies proper and are only accessible through random matchmaking. Once you select it, you're only going to have about 30 seconds to matchmake before it throws you headfirst into the match with no explanation of anything whatsoever. The main reason to do these are just to unlock more than the base 3 engages, aka the renamed link support devices the game gives you. But this is the way you'll be forced to do them if you plan on doing them.
Operation Fallen Sun. I just like to point out that they never explained what an adaptive origami is. They just said we could kill one. That's it. I can't even explain.
So wait, that's
Shush,
random?
just shush. I don't even want to talk about it. I don't even want to fucking talk about it. I don't even want to talk about it. That is the worst. The absolute worst thing I have ever seen.
Multiplayer is both fixed and ruined in this game compared to the old games. For example, you can no longer access multiplayer through the main menu. Now, if you want to do multiplayer, you have to first start up in single player, go to a terminal, go to multiplayer mode. It will then bring you to the multiplayer interface where you have to make your own lobby again, instead of having drop-in, drop-out multiplayer, which by this point I had hoped they would have. The multiplayer is region locked, so don't expect to play with anyone outside your region unless you're willing to trick your client or console into thinking you're downloading it from somewhere else. So if you have any European friends and you live in America, oh well. Game doesn't tell you this anywhere, by the way. We figured this out the hard way, trying to get our British friend into the game with us. That was a fun waste of like 2 hours. The good news is that in this game, multiplayer doesn't crash your game if you have a third or fourth person. In the previous 2 games, they didn't even acknowledge that was a bug, but it's something everybody dealt with. It was literally unplayable with a full group of people because of it. And it's still like, it never got acknowledged, but at least it's fixed here, you know? That's something good I can say. We still can't trade items between players, which is kind of a letdown, so players can't help you with your weapon upgrades, but you know, at least it's stable. And that's a hell of a lot more than I could say about Monster Hunter World when it released, you know, with constant disconnects from the server every 5 minutes, even if you were playing single player. Now let's finally switch topics. Let's talk about graphics, because that's a really easy one. Graphics in this game are a solid improvement. Everything's better. Everything. Even though the level of detail falls off to kinda sheer pixelation in the far distance, you're not very likely to even notice this unless you try, for whatever reason, just looking at the scenery during a timed mission. Performance was finicky. 3 out of 5 times-ish that I launched the game, I was plagued by these crazy frame drops, just ruining the whole experience. It was really difficult to play with that shit. And the only fix I seemed to find was to just restart the game. And it fixed it, and that's really weird. But many other people also reported similar performance issues with different fixes and different causes. And many people reported, and people in my chat as well, that they were completely unable to even launch the game. This game launched months ago in Japan, and they released the game here with instabilities like this. That kind of amazes me. You'd think that they don't give a shit about any of their customers in the slightest if this is the respect they're treating us with. They have 2 whole sections in the credits dedicated to their quality assurance testers. And clearly none of them actually play tested this. That or, you know, frame drops, crashing, black screens. are just their favorite part. The ability to edit your graphical settings in this game are little to none.
Ready? Particles. Alright. Anyway, yeah. So as you see, this game offers very, very robust graphical options. This is it. This is all of them. This is everything. Screen resolution, refresh rate, full screen, VSync, not anti-aliasing, FXAA. That's it. This is on or off. Only FXAA, one of the most useless anti-aliasing settings there are. Shadow quality, MIP map quality. MIP map? Okay. Post-processing quality. No textures. No character models. No level of detail. This is it. Well, who can complain when we got these? Are you ready for it? Particles! Alright.
You get almost zero control over how your game looks. Luckily, it's not very difficult to run, because, scaling this game up or down is nearly impossible. Also, they seem to have arbitrarily included a refresh rate option that scales upwards past 100, yet the game is hard capped at 60 FPS, even with VSync off. So if you were hoping for a silky smooth 120, 144 FPS, or, anything that would make frame drops less noticeable, which I might add is implied that you'd have access to when you select 144 as your refresh rate. Yeah, too bad. Marvelous and Bandai clearly don't give a shit about you. Map design wise, this game kind of suffers from the same issues the last ones did. There's very few maps. Very few. I think, honestly, there's even less maps than God Eater 2 had. They're all very small and designed like cramped hallways. Something I thought would be super easy for them to improve on for this game, but it doesn't feel like they put much effort into it at all. Modern hardware, and you're still fighting gigantic gods in hallways, in maps you can get across quicker than ever, thanks to this shield dash thing now, by the way. The characters in this game are lacking in detail. This game has the smallest cast of any God Eater game, and yet somehow manages to develop each character less than canon, of all people, was developed in the previous games. Their characters are inconsistent, all constantly changing in personality, except for this one lolly character who's literally just a copy and paste of Shio, but younger and made to stalk you every time you're not on a mission, and just generally get in your way. Like, she actually gets in the way of talking to other people and interacting with the terminals. It just kind of feels like they hoped that this lolly would draw people in for some reason, but for me, she was the most annoying character in the entire fucking game. The only love I've even seen her get is this, like, bandwagon, "Oh, we must protect her" meme that's on Twitter. Oh, what a riveting dialogue choice.
I'm studying really hard.
The music is so loud.
I can read lots of words now.
Sorry, say that again. I can't hear you over the pianist.
I want to make everybody happy.
Everybody what?
But I don't know how to do that.
Maybe try playing a piano solo over someone's game.
Even though I'm studying so much. Even though I can read lots of words. Can I have a hug?
No. I said no. But to be honest, since all the other characters were so bland and underdeveloped, I didn't really notice her flaws as much later on, compared to the big, just, like, ugly lack of care of character that's just surrounding you at any given time. Character missions from the other games don't exist here, and resultingly, any development aimed at any one character in specific, any development dedicated to helping you get to know your squad better, all that stuff that was super important and integral to unlocking new abilities for your teammates and just, getting to know them is gone. It wasn't replaced, with more story aimed over here or, any kind of development pushed anywhere else. No, it's not replaced. It's not refocused. It's just gone. They just took this big layer of depth in the story and they just got rid of it. Your group feels like strangers, honestly, throughout the entire game. By the end of the game, I didn't care at all about any of them. The game gave me no reason to. It didn't develop them at all. And even then, their personalities were so inconsistent that they'd say one thing and then do another thing later. They'd be introduced and stereotyped as one thing and then disprove that stereotype the entire game. And I suppose this would be a good time to mention that this is the shortest God Eater game ever made. I beat it in 25 hours, with several hours of that spent on menus and many side missions that offered literally zero reward that I had any use for anyway. I just did it to try to have fun, but I didn't have fun. The story itself plus base weapon progression to max rank can be done in 15 hours if you don't run into any glitches or issues like I did. Also, this is a good time to point out that character customization is mostly the same. A lot of shit was carried over. It's been left mostly untouched. They don't have my favorite origami hat in the game anymore, which is highly upsetting. But they do have a lot more voices for you to pick from for your protagonist. And your protagonist also gets more voice lines than ever before. Of course, it's still only at the very end of the game, but he gets voice acting for an entire scene instead of just 1 or 2 lines, and it's really trippy, but kind of nice. But now, let's talk about the story. Probably the most insulting thing to every person that has ever played the first 2 games. Oh, but first off, if you're new to the series, you won't understand a single fucking thing that's happening in this game. There's only 2 or 3 instances total of story exposition. Most story essential terms that are used and mentioned are not explained in the slightest, such as God Eaters. What's a God Eater? God Arcs. This thing we're using. Why are we using it? Why aren't we using guns? Ash Origami. Origami. Ages, aka Adaptive God Eaters. Regular God Eaters, which for some reason they make a distinction of. These things are mentioned so much in the game, yet they don't explain it ever. It's just assumed and if you don't, it's stuck away in the database. But even then, not all of that stuff is even in the database. For example, what is an Ashborn? I don't know. The game doesn't tell you. The database doesn't tell you. You're just left to assume. About halfway through the game, I just kind of made the connection that Ashborn is another word for Ash Origami, but they don't tell you that. Other very important things that affect a lot of stuff in the game, or its lore, aren't even really mentioned, let alone explained. For example, origami cores. Remember those? One of the biggest deals of the past 2 games. There was an entire scene in one of the games where a core of an origami that had never been successfully defeated, that had never had its core extracted, was brought in. And it was such a big deal. And then you had to finally go fight one. And in this game, cores, you would think origami cores weren't even a thing. They don't mention it. Ever. They don't use it for anything. It used to be an essential part of upgrading your weapons. You remember that? Yeah, it's not even mentioned here. It's not in the game outside of the database. Blood God Eaters seem to have been completely retconned as well, even though the one character in this game that actually appeared in the previous games is a Blood God Eater. He's also half origami, but the game kind of leaves that out too, even though it was developed so much in the past game. The database is the only place to go for any of this information, and a lot of it isn't even there. The only place you can even learn what an adaptive God Eater is, which is the new type of God Eater to this game, is the database. And the database only even describes them as these God Eaters that can survive in the ash and have more oracle cells in them than any other variant of God Eaters, which thus allows them to use burst arts, they call them. Meanwhile, Blood God Eaters had blood arts and many other gameplay features and powers that make adaptive God Eaters look weak and useless, but the game conveniently forgets that. Can't draw attention to their own lack of effort here, obviously. In fact, if you actually read the full database entry into what adaptive God Eaters are, you learn the only real difference between a Generation 2 God Eater and an adaptive God Eater is that the latter can survive in the Ashlands and survive its corruption. This hidden bit of lore is immediately retconned by the game itself, as you get a regular, quote-unquote, God Eater that is part of your squad who accompanies you into battle against Ash Origami, which corrupt them. Which surviving that is part of your aptitude test in the beginning of the game, which is also not explained. In fact, this is the first God Eater where the aptitude test is changed, and they don't explain any of the changes unless you look inside the database. And by the way, the database is still a cluttered mess filled with information. It's a nightmare to go through, but they clearly expect you to read all of it if you've never played the God Eater games before. I needed to read in it because they added a whole bunch of things to the lore in this game that they just don't explain anywhere else. But even then, things like blood God Eaters have been completely struck from the records, as they seem to try to throw away one of the only defining factors of their only cameo character. Oh, and also, you remember Cradle and Alyssa and that big group? Yeah, they just don't exist anymore, apparently. There's no trace of them anywhere, not in the database, not in the game. Do you remember Godark soldiers? Those things you spent a whole game developing? Yeah, they're gone. No trace, no mention, no credit, nothing. They just, like, never existed, ever. There's no fucking anything to imply that they were even alive, that they were even a thing. And you know what's funny is if they were there, it would actually make the whole premise of this game sound ridiculous, and that's probably why they deleted them. The premise of this game is that ages are needed to combat origami in the Ashlands, which I'm not even sure why these things are here. The Ashlands apparently are just these unlivable lands that spread after God Eater 2, which if you remember God Eater 2's ending, doesn't make any sense. And apparently other God Eaters can't survive exposure in the density of the Ashlands or something like that. And even though that's disproven for the entire game by a regular God Eater and a blood God Eater not only surviving in it, but fighting in it, you'd think the insane amount of Godark soldiers that were manufactured would be perfect for this. A metal machine with a Godark. But no, they're not even mentioned in the database anywhere. Instead, the closest thing we even get to Fenrir in the game ends up mass producing an army of origami robots to fight the Ash by first literally consuming the new adaptive God Eaters. Oh, and for some reason in this game, adaptive God Eaters are treated like they're subhuman and like garbage, which is a really stupid, nonsensical plot point, as in the past 2 games, we worked up God Eaters becoming basically worshipped as heroes. Oh, but that's not gone, though. Regular, quote-unquote, God Eaters are apparently still fine. But, you know, the ones that can survive in Ash, yeah, they're treated like fucking aliens. Remember how the past 2 games revolved heavily on civilians and protecting them? Yeah, there's literally not a single civilian in this game. Everyone's either a God Eater or a soldier or some politician. Regular soldiers, by the way, who venture into the deepest parts of the Ashlands, somehow survive ash densities the game earlier explains only a specific group of ages can survive in for more than 10 minutes due to a plot point, thus breaking this game's narrative even more. The actual storyline itself is weak. It's a bunch of unrelated random events thrown together until you get to the final rank of missions, and then suddenly the end of the world scenario pops up, which I actually ended up predicting around the start of the game after seeing that scenario defined in the database. You know how I did it? Because it's the same exact thing as God Eater 2's end scenario. It's just worded differently. The frequency of story cinematics is lower than ever. The amount of voice acting is back to God Eater 1 levels. After every mission, you're forced to run around the entire base looking for chat bubbles so that someone can say something completely unimportant and irrelevant to you before you're allowed to do the next mission, with pretty much no voice acting ever. This is a problem that plagued all the God Eaters, but it's back in more force than ever this time. Towards the end of the game, you're actually forced to speak with every character ever introduced in the game, even those that only got like 2-second appearances, assuming nothing happened to them, just to listen to them all say the exact same thing, just worded a little bit differently before you can move on. Speaking of which, this game brings dialogue choices back into the mix, but it's always like the same sentence worded 3 different ways, so I'm not even sure why dialogue choices are even an option here. But regardless, this game has less dialogue choices than any God Eater game ever has ever. What bits of story the game does give you sounds like someone watched that one episode of SpongeBob where they sing about friendship and wrote an entire game based off of it. Gone are the brutal days of God Eater, where to defend someone's life, you pick up someone else's God Arc, suffering severely disturbing reactions in your Oracle cells, which, by the way, are not explained anywhere in this game despite their plot relevance, that begin turning you into an origami, which, by the way, isn't even described as a thing in this game. Gone are the days of God Eater 2, where the main antagonist had this awesome, just captivating, tragic backstory where her sister was jealous of her, so she pushed her down a flight of stairs, and then getting to see the cinematic as her body thunked down and you heard this loud crack at the bottom of the stairs, seeing her hit the ground as her spine fucking cracked, and her chances of living were reduced to near nil, only to be kept alive by being injected with a bias factor, which, by the way, is also not explained anywhere in this game, despite its plot relevance. That ends up turning her into an origami that brings about the end of the fucking world. No, in this game, the entire story is friendship. And worse, it's a friendship spin-off of the previous 2 games combined. It's not even an original story. Skip past the rest of this section if you want to avoid spoilers. What they do is they copy and paste the Bloodstorms and the End of the World scenario from God Eater 2, and then they throw in a new version of Shio in lolly form that ends up controlling a gigantic origami, which, spoiler, is the final boss of the game, just like God Eater 1. The final cinematic of the game is literally, and I cannot stress this enough, I don't mean figuratively, I mean literally, the endings of God Eater 1 and 2 merged together and then switched back and forth between them every 3 seconds. There isn't a single original thing here. It's literally those 2 endings combined. They clearly think we're all a bunch of fucking idiots, you know? Oh, and they also seem to have retconned Shio, from what I can tell, by the way, because she's not in the database, and they constantly talk about humanoid origami in such a way that implies that she wasn't the first, she never existed, and that humanoid origami are just a regular thing in general, even though you only ever see this one story-relevant one. They also discount the calamities of the past 2 games and what they led to, as if, the entire world wasn't purified in the second game. But, ashlands just spring up out of nowhere. God forbid we even hear about the zone where the purification begun at the end of God Eater 2. And as if the first game didn't end with a world-ending origami not being killed, but simply relocated to the moon and still being a very real threat. They also cut out some of the most iconic origami from this game, such as the Yaksha, which played a bigger role than any of the origami in God Eater 2. They got rid of the Ouroboros, which was one of the most, if not the most iconic origami from God Eater 1. They also shrunk some of the large origami into medium ones, like the big tank one for some reason. Actually, the size of the origami seems to be smaller all in all. The only one that doesn't seem impeded by some size restriction is the final boss of the game, which is pretty much as big as the Ouroboros was, except it's the easiest origami I have ever fought in any of the games. Ever. I'm serious. Fighting ogre tails is harder than fighting this fucking thing. So to sum it all up, let's go back to what I said in the beginning. This is the worst God Eater game ever fucking made. The developers have sort of just treated us like we're a bunch of chumps that will love an IP for being an IP, even if they gut half the features from the game, give us less story, less missions, less characters, and less anything that its predecessors had. And it's reflecting in its sales too. God Eater 3, during its launch in Japan, sold 1/4 of the copies that God Eater 2 did. 1/3 of the original. And so far in the West, it's underselling the PC port of its two PSP predecessors. Its max players has capped out hilariously low, with 5 times more people playing Monster Hunter World this long after its release than God Eater peaked at on its first Saturday after its launch. This is the last God Eater game ever getting made, unless it finds a way to increase its sales rate by a factor of 6. Let's be honest, they're not making their money back with this game, and we're not getting a sequel. This is the last God Eater game ever getting made. And is it even worth it? No, it's not fun. It feels like a concept of the other two games in every single way. Not even a demo, a concept. If they had reused all the same assets again like they did with God Eater 2 and instead just focused on adding a single new gameplay feature, this game would have been leagues better than it is. I'm not even going to give it a rating, to be honest. Me giving this game a rating implies that I think that they can fix what's wrong here or improve it in a sequel. But no, this is the death of God Eater. Don't buy this bullshit. Buy the first 2 games a second time, even. You'd have more fun replaying those with excess copies that you didn't even need by yourself. This was horrible, and I can honestly say I'm never touching another God Eater product ever again after this. And you know something? Fuck anyone who thinks about letting Marvelous First Studios put their hands on any more IPs that are not their own after this train wreck. This was a pathetic attempt. This was horrible. This, Bandai Namco, is why you do not outsource an IP like God Eater. And that's it. We're done. Hopefully you enjoyed this extremely long rant, whether it be for pain or pleasure. Leave a like or a dislike. Both help this video in the algorithm an equal amount. Gotta love YouTube for that. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next Res Reviews.
Goodbye.